Um, all right, so this is the long-awaited part four to the third Attractor Primer series, and what we're going to try and do here is investigate some of the features of what the third attractor might be, or what some of the definite do-nots of the third attractor might be as well. So I've invited a few people to come along here, and in a minute I'm going to give them all an opportunity to just introduce themselves very quickly and explain why they're giving up an hour of their time to come and do this, right? Why they think it's important enough to come and do that. Um, and then we're going to do another little once round of what we think maybe our top two or three features of the third attractor might be. And then whatever time is left, we're going to have an open discussion. So that's in very brief terms how the session is going to go. I'm not going to bother introducing myself. I'm assuming anyone that's watching my channel has already seen enough of me. They have some sense of who I am. So I'm not going to bother doing that. But if the rest of you would like to, if you want, if you feel like, oh, I should go next because mine links nicely to what's gone before, then put your hand up, right? And you'll be the next person to go. If nobody puts their hand up, then the person who, when they reach the end of what they're saying, they can select the next person to go. All right, so let's do it like that. And Logan, why don't you kick us off? So who are you and why are you here?
Sure. I'm Logan. I'm here, I think, primarily because Dialogos really lit me up when I first saw John Vervaeke and Jordan Hall and that crew do it. It really hooked me. Then I ended up accidentally sort of getting a taste of it at the Rebel Wisdom Festival that ended up getting put online. And then I started a group um, and just really took it seriously. And there was even this honeymoon period where it's like I was really applying it in my life to great effect. You know, conversations with strangers that I would normally would be very surface level. Suddenly, I saw all these hidden doors into deeper conversation, and so since then, I've taken conversation very seriously, and then that when I think about these global problems, um, the meta crisis, I just think that conversation and dialogos is kind of the only option we have because it's what collective intelligence looks like from the perspective of an individual. I can't go do collective intelligence directly, but I can do dialogos, which is sort of the same thing. So um, yeah, I'll leave it there. That's sort of I suppose, my position.
Probably makes sense for me
Josh.
to go next since I've been part of the same group that Logan started, and I've also been going to the Emerging Commons and participating in some of those conversations around Third Attractor and other things. Um, so yeah, similarly, I've come to see the good faith dialogue and there's obviously more detail in Vervaeke's whole dialectic into dialogos framework, but simply it's just humility regarding our current perspective and a primacy on the value of connection, philia, in any interaction, and that facilitate or enables really the kind of a collective truth seeking as opposed to kind of digging into a current position and trying to defend what we already think. And as far as the third attractor, it's just like game B, it's kind of this placeholder with a lot of kind of descriptors and important elements that that everyone who's engaging in the conversation around it understands, but it's like we need to collectively figure out how to manifest it. So that's why I continue to be interested in participating in conversations, and more and more I'm feeling like a pull to kind of action, but at the same time it's like in some ways some of the most important things we can do is have conversations or just what are the leverage points in our own lives as far as kind of influencing the collective awareness. Like I have this opportunity for a presentation to this group at work, which we do just on whatever topic is of interest, and I'm really thinking about for this next one because it's interesting. We just merged with this other larger company, and we're under this Bain Capital kind of thing, and I'm just aware of a lot of issues with the current system, which a company like Bain Capital kind of represents being part of, and I'm just thinking through how to try to communicate some of these ideas in a way that lands for people in this audience, and maybe makes them, gives them some things to think about. So anyway, all of us have probably similar opportunities, but the more we can kind of develop our thinking, that's why I continue to be interested in participating in conversation like this.
Okay, then I maybe just continue. So I like what you said, Josh. I also think that the third attractor framework is a very valuable one, just like is Game B, for basically enhancing people's sense of taking meaningful actions in the right direction, right? I think we need like some sort of a bigger picture that helps us orient, and then also orient ourselves and also our actions towards something more meaningful, be it Game B or a third attractor or some sort of a culture. I think there's many themes that we can discuss on later. So yeah, that's I'm pretty interested in those overarching themes and topics. And I'm here because Stefan and I have, after being inspired by Danish Schmachtenberg and others, have started a crew on Emergent Commons, which is like a sense-making platform. And there we have our own crew now, and are using the third attractor framework to make sense and use collective intelligence. So yeah, I think I hand it over to you, Stefan.
Yes, I think there's not too much that I have to add here. A lot of valuable things have been said, and I would just be summarizing most of it. What I want to say is just what resonated with me at the beginning is the dialogos as the theme, which I think I have not put as much effort into really, or I don't know that concept as much. But I think just from imagining it and hearing you explain it, Logan, in the beginning, I think that's exactly what Patrick and I are doing in our sessions as well, which is all about holding a space, having respectful conversations, trying to use collective intelligence to perform collective sense-making. And that's kind of what we took away from the Sense-Making 101 course from Rebel Wisdom, is that if you want to solve or at least try to understand these global problems, you just simply cannot do it alone. And that's why you always need several people talking about it together. You might still not solve it, but you'll get a hell of a lot closer than you would alone. I think that's it for me. So I think
all right,
back
great.
to you.
Thanks, guys, and thank you for keeping it brief. I mean, obviously, the briefer we keep these sort of introductory things, the longer we have for the dialogos afterwards, right? And as a couple of you have already emphasized, right, that is the main point of doing this video in this way, is to try and model the process of dialogos as well as the content of what we're talking about. We're also attempting to model the process of dialogos for anyone that's watching it. So thank you very much for bringing that up. I did actually mean to mention that in my little intro at the start, and I forgot. So thank you very much for resurrecting it for me. That's great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go around again. I'm going to start, and we're going to go around again and just try and articulate like 2 or 3 things, something like that, that really stand out for us as being the most important things that the third attractor must embody, or the most important things that the third attractor must avoid, right? Like either of these things, but like the ones that really stand out to you individually. And like I say, I'll start, which will give the rest of you a chance, if you haven't already prepared something, to give some thought to it, and maybe something I say will trigger some things in you as well. And much like we've done in this one, if while I'm talking one of you feels, oh yeah, what I'm going to say is going to link really nicely to this, then put your hand up and you'll be next to go. If not, then when I reach the end of what I've got to say, I'll just pick at random someone to go there, and we'll go like that, just like we did last time. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen because I've prepared a couple of little slides from the first 3 parts of the video, both as summary, but also it's going to lead me into giving what I think are the most important features of the third attractor. So it performs both functions. So firstly, the idea of collection action failures, and there's hundreds and hundreds of these. I mean, there's a few of them written around this circle, but the point is the common underlying drivers. And so, this idea of looking as fully as we can at the upstream drivers of things, right? What is actually driving these problems? What is actually causing these things, rather than looking at the symptom and trying to alleviate that, focusing more permanently on the upstream drivers, and getting around these dynamics of being incentivized to act against your own long-term interests in order to pursue some short-term goal, right? Like these perverse incentives abound everywhere. And if you can solve these things, you get everything else for free, right? All of the consequences of these underlying drivers get solved at the same time if you can actually tackle these underlying drivers. So that was one thing. Then there's this notion of exponential technology, right? And we're saddled with that. Exponential technology ain't going anywhere. It's not like we can solve so that we can take this exponential nature out of technology, right? We can't do that. All we can do is learn how to manage it more effectively. And so navigating that space of living in a world where we have exponential technology and there's nothing to do about it, and there's nothing we can do about it, we just have to live with it. That's another key part. And so these two things together, the exponential technology and the collective action failures, make up that saying of the wisdom of gods without the power of gods. We wield the power of gods without the wisdom of gods with which to wield it. And so catastrophic risk forever increasing, and catastrophic risk either emerges as catastrophe of some kind, or to prevent catastrophe, dystopian control systems. And this, in summary, is the meta crisis. And so the third attractor is, as Josh said, I really like that. It's exactly what it is. Just like Game B, it's a placeholder name for something that we cannot yet really see from where we are. We can maybe get the occasional glimpse of it, right? But we can't fully see, we can't fully articulate what this thing is from where we stand, from our current mindsets, from our current ways of thinking. We can't conceive of this thing fully yet. And so that's what we're here to do, is to try and explore the edges of it, right? Like what are the edges of it look like? The bits that we can see, what do they look like, and what might be behind those? And so I really like this way of thinking about it, right? That we as human beings create technology, and that technology changes the environment, right? And then the changes in the environment then dictate to us what technologies we next need to do, and all of that. And so these three things playing off against each other create a highly complex space which we need to navigate, right? Like these three things are all playing off against each other and changing the relationships to each other constantly all the time. The sweet spot between these things is constantly shifting. And so I'm just going to finish off with this as my top 2 or 3 things that the third attractor must embody. And so part of it is what we are doing now, right? This idea of collective intelligence, people coming together, sharing their perspectives, not arguing to see who is right, but actually overlaying their perspectives on top of each other, weaving them together in order to find a larger perspective, right? A transpersonal perspective, as opposed to individual perspectives. And that from that flows the ability to make better decisions which take more things into account, right? Both in terms of causes and externalities that are going to be created. The more minds you have on a problem, the more of these things can be anticipated and seen in advance. But you have to understand that whatever you do, you're never going to anticipate everything. You're never going to account for all of the upstream drivers. You're never going to anticipate all of the externalities. And so decision making has to be done in this way of not coming to a decision and then going with it and sticking with it, right? But coming to a decision which you hold lightly, you do it, you watch the consequences of it and revise and update that decision. You've got this constant feedback loop, right? Decision making is not something you arrive at. It is something which is part of a cycle of acting, observing, tinkering, reformulating, that kind of thing, like an OODA loop, right? Like observe, orient, decide, act. That sort of notion of the OODA loop. And then my final thing on what I think the third attractor would have to embody is this notion of wholeness. Daniel talks about this, that every part is part of a larger whole, and by doing something to the part, you are inevitably causing consequence to the whole, right? And we need to embody that sense of being embedded in something much bigger than ourselves, and all of our decision making needs to be rooted in that. Now, where do you get that from? That feels to me like that's rooted in education. And so, to finally sum up, transparency, wholeness, and acting from that place of understanding that you're never going to get it absolutely right. You're always going to have to update and change your decision making. There we go. That's me. And I think Logan had his hand up next.
Yeah, sure. So I just had a couple of things. One is sort of related to what you were talking, Eric, about, or it fills in the picture. So When we talk about game B or the third attractor, it's a tricky thing to talk about because we're talking about it such an open question that it can be hard. You know, in my head, I'm imagining the viewer trying to like, what are you even like? What exactly are you talking about, really, though? And I guess from that imagining, I'm finding myself wanting to start with this idea of, you know, if we're unsatisfied with, I'm just going to use game A, game B for the moment. If we're unsatisfied with game A and we want a game B has to outcompete game A. And so this game B or this third attractor has certain characteristics that we can start to identify and fill in the gaps. And for me, this requirement that it has to outcompete game A in game A is essential. Or in the terms of the third attractor has to be more attractive than the dystopia and the destruction. Well, when put in those terms, it sounds easy. Anything's kind of more attractive than those two. But it has to be, I guess, if I really try to pull it into the terms of the third attractor, it's like it has to be attractive today. It can't be attractive based on something that's too hypothetical. So that's one point. The other point that has to do with what you were talking about, Eric, with decisions and holding them lightly. I think another key piece of the puzzle is it has to do with what does it look like to make decisions as a collective as opposed to an individual. There was a podcast recently. I'll try to find the name of it because it's fascinating. He talks about what does it look like to be a self in a higher collective. So, for example, a heart cell in a heart, or a heart in a body. And if you are a heart cell, you're not operating at the level of pumping the heart, certainly not at the level of like managing blood flow in the body. That's actually not your job. And so if we're looking at humanity making collective decisions on these big problems, I think it's important to realize it's not your job or my job to solve climate change or to get all the plastic out of the food, whatever. I mean, you could name there's an infinite number of these big problems, which makes it intimidating. But it's not our job to solve those directly. It's more our job to, like, how do I be the node in a network such that the network solves the problem? And I suppose another question is like, how do I make sure that I'm in that right network and not some network that's actually destroying? Because there's, a corporation is also a network in which I could be a node that could be destroying the environment. But for me, that's more the angle, and which brings me back to dialogos. I was sort of implying that earlier. So just to sum up that idea, it's this idea of nested cells. What does it look like to be a cell in a body, metaphorically speaking? And how do you, and how do you as a cell, there's two questions. How do you behave as a cell rightly? And what kind of body do we want to have such that the cells don't become cancerous and are helpful? It's kind of like the same problem viewed from different angles. We want to engineer the body, but act as the cell. And how do we do that? Yeah, so that's the one thing. And then the other thing is just like this open question. These ideas of the third attractor in the game, they're such open questions. All we can sort of do is start filling in the edges for now. I'll end there. I don't remember who had their hand up next. You're muted, Eric.
I think it was me, so I'll just continue if that's cool. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is the main requirement that I'm 100% sure that is going to be essential in being part of this. But I wanted to reference something that you had in your presentation with the exponential curves that came up to me, because whenever the problem is rising exponentially, like your solutions have to rise at least as fast exponentially, and it feels like we're already 17 steps behind. So kind of we need some kind of multiplicator or something that rises at least as fast, and that's when AI came up for me. So I think in getting to that next level of sense making or collective intelligence problem solving or whatever you want to call that, and we definitely need to get to that next level. So that is, I think, one of the main requirements that I would put my name behind. How we solve problems just has to change by default. And I think having artificial intelligence being a part of that, as Schmachtenberger says in the videos, of maybe not taking the decisions or whatever, but just kind of making sure that the process is as efficient as possible. I think that might be one of the biggest changes, because that is happening right now with it becoming much more powerful, with everybody having access to it. And I think that's just one of the multiplicators that might be necessary. I'm saying might because I'm not 100% sure, but that might just propel the solution making process a lot faster than we could do it even with collective intelligence. And I'll hand it over, Patrick. That was the one point I wanted to mention right away.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. I feel some resonance there, and also to what you, Eric, and Logan were saying. So what I want to add there, maybe using a little bit of a different vocabulary, is that what I really appreciate about the third attractor framework is that this emphasis on vision-oriented action, right? So it's really making an attempt to think from the end and try to picture a vision, and also being aware that it needs to be something that we create. Yeah, it's really something that a whole big picture view that we are trying to create. Not trying to solve problems narrowly, like individual problems, but really taking this full thing and trying to work our ways towards a better future. And of course, this is inspiring, but it can also be intimidating. I think you mentioned that. And I think that's why a second very crucial point is, and you can really also see it in the whole podcast of the third attractor, it's a lot about connectedness, right? So it's a lot about, of course, no one can solve everything on his or her own. So it's a lot about finding the right people that have another puzzle piece that you might need in order to come up with a even more holistic solution. And these things add up and add up. So what we want is not experts that are only focused on their narrow subject and are not really caring about the bigger picture, but we want to have still experts who then are also able to see how their contribution fits into the bigger picture. I think that's what emerging for me there. And then of course there's also a connectedness as an end in itself. I think it's really about creating something where all of us, humanity as a whole, feels connected. Yeah. As humanity, but also connected to all living things and the earth, and that being like a vision that is attracting us, working towards something that we wouldn't do if we were only considering ourselves like atomic individuals somewhere in the universe all alone.
Yeah, going last on this round, but resonating with a lot with what's been said, and a few potential pushbacks or open questions for me. Very much resonate with the last of what Patrick was just saying, because I feel like really fundamentally, in order for any of this to work, it's a shift, it's a mind shift for a critical mass of people to understand, both intellectually and kind of from a felt level, the reality of our interconnectedness. Charles Eisenstein uses the term interbeing, especially as all of our systems have become more globalized. It's it's always been true, but it's even more true now. The interconnectedness and the consequences of playing these short-term self-interest games. It may not, for an individual banker, whoever, it may not, like, the long-term consequences, existential consequences, might not come up in one's own lifetime, but if one cares at all about future generations, it's a whole different way of operating than kind of the dominant one that's been there. And a lot of times people push back on this kind of notion and say, well, that's utopian, people just don't operate that way, there's inherent selfishness, and it's like that's partially true. There's also, if we look at nature, and we are part of, we came out of nature, we're really not separate from it, even though we built up all these different technologies and things that make it possible to feel like we are. There's a symbiosis is what it's really an important integral part of what makes ecosystems work and thrive and be so resilient. Multiple asteroids and other disasters have could have potentially wiped out life, but it's been resilient in the face of all that. And so when I think about you know, what works. It's like, look at what works in nature. And so just to answer the question at hand, it's the fundamental thing is I think that sort of mind shift and heart shift in understanding, and then operating from that place, because, you know, whether we use AI or not, that's one sort of open question for me. There's a lot of potential, you know, leveraging of things, but if AI is going to do kind of what we set it to do, and it can help like dystopian things happen, you know, like control systems, social control, or, you know, if it's in service of this kind of, you know, better world our hearts know is possible that Charles Eisenstein talks about. That's another thing where I feel like, does it have to be attractive today, like materially? Like, do we have to have a, you know, a game B system that people can just see and go, oh yeah, I want to, you know, live and operate in that? I think in order to get it going, like, you know, even us, it's like there's inspiration and being pulled toward an idea that isn't quite here yet, but feels like something better that we do want to, you know, help contribute toward manifesting. So anyway, yeah, I guess that's all I'll say for this round.
Was there another round you wanted to go through, Eric? I don't remember.
Well, no, but I'm glad you give me the opportunity to jump in. What my plan was just for people watching. I mean, I know we're all familiar with this kind of stuff, but just for people watching, I just wanted to highlight a couple of sort of not rules exactly, but protocols, say, of dialogos, something like that, that we endeavor to embody in these types of conversations. And so one of them is rule omega. And I mean, I could go on and on about rule omega, but in its simplest form, rule omega is something like separating signal from noise in what you're hearing from people, amplifying the signal and down regulating the noise. That's what rule omega is all about, right? Like everybody produces a mixture of signal and noise, right? We all do that. And so the idea is to focus in on the signal and amplify that while ignoring the noise. That's the idea of rule omega. And then there's another one which you guys may not know, which I've come across in a different context, which is SHUVA, which is an acronym for see, hear, understand, value, appreciate. And so it's things like reflecting back at people what they've said in a way that demonstrates that you have understood what they've said. It's that kind of thing. And so it's, you know, whether you agree or not, even if we're going to go on to disagree with them, by demonstrating that you have listened carefully and attentively and understood what they've said before then voicing your disagreement, right? It shows respect for the process. And so, yeah, I just wanted to for the audience watching, insofar as there is an audience watching, I just wanted to make those apparent. So yeah, and from now on, just as you feel. Oh, in fact, sorry, just one other thing I wanted to do, just summarize some of the things which came up in that little cycle that we went around. Like this idea of connectedness and interdependence. That, I mean, that's the same thing. That's exactly the same notion that I was driving at with wholeness, right? Like this fact that everything is connected to everything else, everything depends on everything else, and that we need to learn to act from a place of understanding that, right? Like that's I think we would probably all agree on that. That's a pretty common theme. It came up a few times in slightly different vocabularies. The thing that Stefan brought up, this like, we're already so far behind, we need like a turbo boost, right? We need some extra exponential growth in our sense making in order to catch up with how far behind we are the technology curves, and perhaps AI can provide us with that boost, right? Like, yeah, perhaps so. I mean, it's certainly something worth exploring. The vision-oriented action, I think, is a really interesting idea, right? Like having a clear vision of where you're trying to go and be oriented by that. Oh yeah, and the changing of mindset. That's another thing, right? There's this fundamental alteration of mindset for like changing the sphere of concern would be another way of saying it, right? Like changing the things that we concern ourselves with, and that idea of it being attractive today, not in a material way, but in a way which provides hope and aspiration and you know, like something meaningful and wonderful that it is worth making an effort for, worth making a sacrifice for, right? Like that can be very, very appealing, and in a non-material intrinsic kind of way. So perhaps that's how the third attractor needs to be framed, as a sort of aspirational endeavor that we can get behind. So that's it. I think I've spoken for enough now, and you've got your hand up. Away you go, Logan.
Yeah, well, so I wanted to respond to some of what Patrick and Josh were saying. but maybe just to be a bit meta for the viewer. So Eric, you were talking about sort of the habits that we have for dialogos. And so what I'm going to do is one of my favorite things to do when I have the opportunity, which is to sort of take something someone has said, in this case, two someone's, and actually add my thoughts on top of it. And the best dialogos happens when you can do that every time when you speak. It's not that you're taking an idea that you had saved for 10 minutes and you bring it forward, but rather you are responding directly and adding your own stuff on top of it, and kind of there's this weaving that happens. And so Patrick talked about vision, which really tickled me, because vision is something that's relevant in my life. I'm noticing in my life that how crucial. So I've been trying to stay in flow more. How do I do that? How do I stay in flow more with my work? It's sort of entrepreneurship, self-employed stuff. So it's really important that I stay motivated. And I'm noticing that if I have a vision it's obvious in the long term, you need a vision, like way out here, to really be motivated. But what I'm noticing is just like these nested visions that are also necessary. And so I'm doing a lot more sketching. I'll sketch something out. I'll really get it to be in my head with even the shortest term things. And now all of a sudden it's really easy to stay in flow. And then Josh made the point that it's not that the third attractor needs to be attractive today. And then it seemed like he was pointing towards, but it sort of needs to bring us in the right direction, so those two things to me kind of are almost saying the same thing, are related. We need not just the big vision of the third attractor, but we sort of need the vision of, like, what are we doing today? And one way that manifests perhaps is this call. We're feeling, I imagine, invested in this call because we have a vision for what we want it to look like. So I don't know what my main point there is, but that's just a connection that I see. And then I just wrote this down, Patrick, when you were talking. You talked about, you made this interesting connection between vision and collecting puzzle pieces, collecting people. And that is a very evocative vision. So I just want to say it again. If you have the vision and it's calling you enough, suddenly it's like the people and the puzzle pieces form around you almost automatically. Which is a magical thing. And so that to me seems like part of the solution. What is the vision that is just so mind-blowing that people get excited to join you? I remember when I first got into dialogos, I mentioned it a couple times, again with that honeymoon energy, to people that I only sort of knew, and everyone shut up and was like, whoa, what are you doing? That's cool. And I was like, oh, this is weird. People are like, there's something so attractive and alluring when you get that, I don't know, when you get that glow. I don't know how else to put it. So that's got to be part of the solution. It has to be sexy. It's another way someone else put it. Third attractor, game B, it has to be sexy, right? So.
Yeah, Vervaeke says steal the culture. That's kind of, anyway, one version of that.
Yeah, responding to that, Logan, I really appreciated you adding there on the thoughts, and how I understood what you said, or part of what you said was that ability to deal with ever increasing complexity, right? So maybe we have a vision, but it's so long term, we also need to have more short term visions, and then also we need to be able to not only break longer term visions down, but also to adapt when changes are coming from the environment that we haven't anticipated, right? So of course, there's the need for a vision, but then there's also the need to be adaptive and to deal with complexity, to deal with accidents and all these kinds of stuff. And that's not easy and requires abilities. And we need to be able to move into a learning zone that also needs to be attractive, right? Because there seems to be a pull that I feel, and probably many people feel, towards a comfort zone where everything is safe and we know what's, we know what we want to do. But there's a different kind of attraction, it seems like to me, in the learning zone, when you meet people who are really vision driven and you think like, I want to be part of this, right? That seems to be like an adventure that is calling. And it is valuable to go into that learning zone, even if I'm failing, even if I don't know what's coming up next. It is worth it after all. And I think there needs to be projects and people who exemplify that and are making the first move, and then hopefully it gains momentum in the long run. Yeah,
This
Eric.
is really good. This is exactly what dialogos is all about, right? Because I've just had what feels like an insight, which there's no possible way I would have had I not been sitting here listening to this conversation unfold, right? So I mean, it's exactly what it's all about. And so this idea of the importance of a vision, totally agree, right? And people who have this vision, you can feel it in them, right? That they're inspired by it, and that is itself an incredibly attractive energy. You're drawn towards that, right? And this idea of, but that in itself is not enough, right? You've also got to watch out for what are the effects of pursuing this vision having, right? And you've got to be mindful of that. You can't be all about the vision. And it feels to me that there's a third piece here is the adjacent possibles, right? Like what we can't go straight from here to the vision, right? Like what's the first step that we can take from here that meaningfully moves us in the direction of that vision? It's not the whole journey, right? But it's a thing we can do from here now, you know, practically, and that's another piece that has to be coordinated into this. And the sense of insight came from this. Feels like what you were talking about is the connectedness and the dialogos and the networking, right? Like connecting these types of people together, the types of people who have the visions with the types of people who can see the light of the vision and see what it is illuminating right in front of us, right? Like see, not be focused on the joy of getting that, but see what's the first thing that the light of that touches that's closest to us, right? That, and connecting these people to each other and honoring and respecting what each of them brings to the process of moving towards that vision, right? That feels like a big part of it. I'm done.
Yeah, it's funny. I was at the exact same question in my head when you started talking about it. So like, what are the next steps? I think if we look at the vision, we all probably agree, I mean, in some kind of boundaries, but we all agree what the vision is going to look like. Call it game B, call it third attractor, call it whatever you want. We kind of know what basic values we share. I think where we would much less agree, or maybe much less have an idea, is what is the next step to get to that. And if we go back to one of the things that we all agreed was necessary is that mindset change. Maybe I don't have the answer, but I'd rather pose the question. In order to get people to have this mindset or a mind shift in a way, is it necessary first to kind of realize the urgency of the problem that we run into globally or seem to be running into, to even have that, to even feel that urgency to be willing to make that kind of mind shift? Because it's super hard to change your worldview in a way like that. And if you think everybody's just going to be flowers and riches forever, that's much more comfortable where we're again in the learning zone. To try to envision a new kind of future, maybe first, do we have to not make people realize, but do we first have to realize the urgency, or can we go into action without having to paint doom on the wall first? I guess that's kind of the question.
Yeah, I'd love to respond to that. My reaction is that to go into a sense of urgency and fear would be sort of the wrong move. And I'm actually glad, Josh, you mentioned Charles Einstein and the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. That was already coming up in my head, and he makes a wonderful point that, like, if a house is on fire and there's a baby inside, you immediately begin moving because it's obvious what to do. There's no anxiety about what to do. There's no worries about motivation. You just, almost as if it wasn't even you making the decision, you get up and you go as soon as you realize that problem. But then he's like, well, what if all the houses in your neighborhood are on fire? And what if half the people whose houses are on fire don't believe that their houses are on fire? And he kind of makes it more complicated. He's like, at some point, you literally have to just sit down and action itself doesn't make sense anymore because the problem is so much more complex beyond your comprehension. And so when we talk about next steps, I'm always coming back to dialogos and conversation, because it's like, it's so big. I don't know what the next step is. And sometimes what that means is the next step is just to sit down and sort of almost meditate on the vision. Yeah, I think I had something else I wanted to say, but that's what came out. So I'll end there.
Yeah, as the conversation's been going on, sometimes it's helpful, at least for me, and I'm sure generally, to think of kind of like specific examples and potential ways that things could shift. So, you know, for pretty much my whole career, I've worked in kind of healthcare related arenas. And now I work for a software company that works with hospitals and health systems and provides a lot of different tools for them. As I've, over the last, I don't know, 10 years probably, I've definitely had a shift in how I'm seeing how the whole healthcare system's working. Like we knew, it wasn't perfect. There were issues. Obamacare was trying to be established, the single payer option, all these different things. But the European system, which is more, NHS or having these socialized it tends to work better, right? But at the same time, even those systems get kind of captured by a lot of these dynamics that that Eric was pointing to earlier with his slides. And in the current context, so just thinking in terms of potential shifts, right? In the American system, at least, there's this layer of administration over a lot of different systems, whether that's academia, but healthcare in this case, let's stick with that. Doesn't add value really, pays a bunch of people a lot of money, and the incentive is to continue like looking for ways to maximize getting shareholder value, especially for the for-profit healthcare systems. And so people who get into the business, doctors, nurses, others who really want to, their motivation is like they want to help people, end up feeling like cogs in this machine. And so there's a fulcrum point there, it feels like, for shifting things to more of a game B. Like the path again is not clear to me, but that's one example where it's like, if we can help people who are in the systems already, kind of, it's like they already see it. I think they already understand the issues, they experience it day to day, but having a vision for what else might be possible, and helping establish those, it's like, yeah, like a game B sort of healthcare potentially, or another idea is like influence the people who run the existing system. I just feel like the incentives are too enticing, and maybe so there's a bit of both. It's probably going to happen kind of in both, or on all these different levels. But to start with, like the earliest steps from here feel like, help through dialogos and other ways of getting information, helping mind shift is helping people in the systems to kind of gain the understandings that we've understood, and have some ideas about how they can bring their skills into a more, and again, feeling like, yes, this is actually what I got into this for. Like, I want to help people, and I want to be, like a benefit to a system, and feel the, the appreciation, the love from that. So anyway, just some thoughts.
You're muted. Oh.
Yeah, no, thanks. Just directly following on from that, there is an organization I've become aware of recently. It's primarily in the UK, although they have started to branch out now into other places, called the People's Health Alliance. And that's exactly what they are doing, is people who are disenfranchised or leaving professional healthcare, usually the National Health Service in the UK, are joining this organization and starting to set up a people-driven healthcare system. And so hubs are springing up all over the country where practitioners and administrators and whatever are getting together, largely voluntary. Funding model is obviously a big part of this going forward, but I mean, at the moment, it's working largely on volunteers. Obviously, that's not sustainable, and they're well aware of that. But the point is, this mindset, which we've come back to a few times now, right? This idea of, hey, we don't have to wait around for these ossified institutions to come to their senses if they're ever going to, right? Like, actually, the best way to do this is to take control of these things ourselves, and to have practitioners, exactly what Josh was just saying, right? Like, doing the thing that they joined the profession to do in the first place, to help people, right? To make people healthier and happier and make their lives better, right? Like that's why they became healthcare professionals in the first place. And so it's offering them an opportunity to go back and do that, free of the ridiculous bureaucratic framework within which you have to work in traditional healthcare. Now, whether or not it will sustain itself, but it's growing unbelievably quickly. Look, I'll put a link in the description when I publish this video, but do take a look at the People's Health Alliance. It's pretty inspiring. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, and maybe just some meta comments of what I've seen. I really appreciated this sort of, as I saw it, what you, Josh, was saying, and then Eric. It was like a zooming in on like a certain issue, a certain project within this whole framework that needs to be addressed. And then this is an ability again, right? We need to be able to zoom in on problems and then really focus on, okay, and what's the next steps? What is the funding? What are all these issues that emerge then when we focus in there? And then also be able to zoom out again and see the bigger picture and see how this fits into the vision, as we call it, yeah. And from what you said, I think, Logan, about the importance of not only start acting, but also sit there, meditate, find flow states in conversation with people. I think there's something that I cannot really grasp yet, but it seems to me that this also in itself could be a third attractor to people, because we have a really deep drive to make sense, to create meaning, right? To make meaning. And we are in a meaning crisis, as many of you maybe are familiar with John Vervaeke's work. So this is really something that people crave for, meaning, yeah, making a contribution that is bigger than oneself, but also meaning that comes from dialogos, from flow states. So if this, I think this could also or should be part of the third attractor, like spaces, opportunities, environments that enhance meaning. And this is something that could attract people, yeah.
I really like that idea. The flow state as a third attractor on the individual level sounds really, really, yeah, good to me. Also, what I wanted to point out again, what you said, Eric, in the little your comments in the middle, when you talked about the mindset change from, well, the institutions are just going to take care to, well, maybe I have to be part of the solution myself and have to get into action. I don't think I've ever had that thought consciously in this topic. I thought about it a lot with COVID, etc. But for the third attractor, for those people that do realize there's huge problems that we're seemingly running into, to, well, maybe I can be a part of at least being a part of some tiny portion of the solution. I think that is really valuable, which I just wanted to point out again. And then I have one last comment that I also want to add, which we've talked about in one of our sessions a few times ago, is the civium idea, which I think it after all of these conversations or all of these comments, kind of it seems to tie together. Where for me the civium idea is this online world where we solve the problems and where we use the collective intelligence of the whole world, and the offline portion where we live in sustainable communities. And I just wanted to throw that into the conversation again.
Yeah, I just to respond to what you were saying, Patrick, you made me realize that what I heard someone saying it has to be sexy actually came from the dialogos group. That's actually what they were saying about dialogos. Like, how do we get these other people on board? And I like the framing of the third attractor could be attractive in that, if I'm at a bar and I just hear somebody having a really good conversation, sometimes you can just tell it's like, I want to be in that conversation. And if we could do that in life, and we can just simply do what we're doing here, but maybe even more impactfully do that in real life, have good conversations, ask deep questions. Something that I do now after getting into dialogos that somebody pointed out to me is they said that you tend to express your emotions in uncertainty, which invites other people to do so. So that's just like a trick I seem to have picked up. And so if we can model just the way of thinking about these problems, not from a place of fear, which gets back to Stefan's question, but from a place of play, perhaps, and show how much fun we're having, then that could lead to, the brain drain from the old institutions, like the medical industry, like you guys are talking, to this more almost carefree sort of space. And that's interesting. And I'll just end on this, that the carefree thing, again, seems to be so crucial to it. And it's also part of the challenge, because why don't these medical professions give up their place in the system? Because the system gives them a paycheck, and the belief is that the paycheck gives you existence, essentially. which is a fear thing. We want to invite them into this more carefree place. But to do that, we have to answer the question of like, well, how are you going to, well, their first version of the question will be like, well, where do I get the money? And then, you know, but their question is really, how do I survive? Or where does my meaning come from? And so that's the challenge. So I guess to summarize that last thought, it's like, we need to show off the fun and sexiness of this new way of being. And that's part of it. But the other part of it is like, and maybe this can be modeled instead of answered, but we have to somehow address the concern of like, well, how do I survive if I'm not working in the machine? And maybe the answer is modeling it. Well, look at me, you know, I'm doing this. So I'll end there. Yeah.
Josh, you want to have the final word? We've got about 2 minutes left, so your hand is up. Do you want to use this opportunity to have the final word for the session as well, and wrap it up as best you as you see fit?
I will do my best. So there were a few points that were coming up that I wanted to touch on. One was and it came up a little earlier with the AI notion and kind of the idea that we can kind of think our way through this. That is not like, yes, there's some usefulness from the, you know, left brain, obviously, you know, analysis, and, you know, we need to use that. AI can maybe be a tool to kind of boost that part of it. But the real, almost more important, I think, is that feeling, the heart-based, and yeah, the pull toward meaning and connection, the things that are really meaningful and valuable in our existence, which kind of ties in with the money thing. Money, like we put, our current system puts so much of a primacy on it, you know, profit, and it's just like profit over everything, profit over the well-being of people or the environment, and that's just leading to all this chaos and destruction. So, you know, and there's dialogos as a practice. There's other practices that help us kind of tap into that and you know, exercise that muscle, and that's an important piece. Then, and I just on the notion of carefree, like, sure, the notion of play definitely resonates, but there's also this notion of serious play, which I think, like, it's still inspirational, it's still attractive, but it's in service of, you know, not just playing games, but engaging in something where there's uncertainty and you know, a give and take, and just those dynamics of play that feel like that's important as well. And just on the money.
Can I just jump in with something really quickly here, and then I'll hand back to you, Josh? There's a thing about James Bond, right? Defusing the bomb at the end of the movie, right? Like, and he's only got 30 seconds, and the bomb's going to go off. But he doesn't rush. He doesn't panic, right? He stops. He adjusts his tie. Do you know what I mean? He casts a glance at the hot babe who's sitting. Do you know what I mean? And so it's that kind of thing. Like, it's dead fucking serious, and yet he still does it with a glint on his eye and a smirk on his face, and, you know, unrushed, unhurried, right? Like that kind of thing. Sorry, I don't know where that popped into my head from, but it just seemed apropos. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And it's it kind of ties in with like fear. Fear is you know, you kind of shrink, you clamp down, whereas if you lean into this sort of, yeah, the play, that idea, there's an opening, you know, you're engaging with curiosity, and that feels important as well. We're just about out of time. Just in terms of there's many different frameworks. I guess I'm not going to outline the three that I have in mind. We don't have time, but I feel like conversations like this, and also conversations with some of the more, you know, well-known thinkers in these conversations, just kind of like merging ideas. You know, Vervaeke's one. Peterson has some ideas, kind of fractal social units, even from Exodus. That far back, it was a model. And so anyway, yeah. Just keeping the conversation going and looking for ways to take action and ideas about how to, you know, work with existing systems to move us in the direction we want to go.
Thank you all very much indeed. I know you guys have got another call to get to. In fact, about the third Attractor. So yeah, no, thank you all, and good to have the hard boundary. Otherwise, we could go on and on and on and on and on. Yeah, we'll see how many people watch this, and whether there's any sort of demand for a part two, because I feel like Civium is something to be worth going into more, for example, right? Anyway, thank you all very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. See you soon.
Cool.
I also appreciate it. We can do
Appreciate
it
it.
again for
Thank you,
sure.
Eric.
All right. Bye.
Bye.